Hi, I'm Lori, a senior solo traveler, and I recently took 2 cruises back-to-back on the Windstar STAR Pride, traveling from Barbados to Panama. The cruise was billed as the Star Collector, Windward Islands, and Spanish New World. I have posted additional videos from this cruise, including detailed videos of the port stops, as well as an overview of the Windstar ship and stateroom layouts. See the links below for that information. In this video, I will give an overview of the cruise experience, including ship activities, food, service, embarkation and disembarkation, and excursions. I'll try to summarize here, so look to the other videos for more detailed information. Activities. Each day there was a schedule of activities that included events such as port talks, where they shared information on the next day's destination, special lectures on relevant topics, and trivia or games. There were also special events, such as the captain's welcome and farewell ceremonies. On these evenings, everyone was invited up on deck during cocktail hour to celebrate with champagne. The spa and boutique offered special events, and if you wanted a more solitary experience, the yacht club had puzzles, games, and books. There were many more activities to enjoy on board than I consumed. The pool is a main attraction for many passengers. Since I'm from Arizona, I wasn't interested in soaking up the sun, but I know many people loved it. And on this cruise, there were people that planted themselves poolside and didn't move much all day. There were also live music events daily and at different times and places on the ship. This included a duo that sang during cocktail hour and late-night entertainment by the FX band in the Compass Rose. The singers and musicians also performed at special events. There was one event that stood out. It was an evening barbecue that had a massive display of food set up on the poolside deck. It was fabulous to eat under the stars with the accompaniment of live music. On one of the first nights, they had a participatory dance-off, where the staff danced various line dances and encouraged passengers to join them. I took them up on it and had a great time. They also had a staff talent show one night where many of the staff shared their hidden talents. When we arrived in Cartagena, they had some local dancers and musicians board the ship to perform for us. So there were many activities to keep everyone entertained and offerings to suit just about everyone's taste. Importantly for me, there was a solo traveler meetup on the first day. This allowed all the solo passengers to connect. We ate dinner together on the first night and kept each other company throughout the cruise. Food. There are basically 4 restaurants on the ship. The main dining room, Amphora, which is only open in the evenings. It is an elegant restaurant with a menu of daily specials and standard favorites. The Veranda Buffet is open for breakfast and lunch and has an extensive display of food. In the evening, the Veranda turns into Candle's Restaurant, which is one of the 2 specialty restaurants on the ship. To eat here, you have to make a reservation in advance. What is nice about the Veranda or Candle's is that it has outdoor seating. I especially enjoyed this in the evening when the temperatures cooled down and you could see the lights from the shore or boats passing by. The other specialty restaurant on the ship is Cuadro 44, which specializes in Spanish food. It is quite a small restaurant, so reservations are definitely required. For more casual fare, there is the Star Grill, which is 1 deck up from the pool. It specializes in barbecue and grilled food, although it also served breakfast in the morning. Often this restaurant was open when the others were closed. It had an extensive salad bar, desserts, and an ice cream machine. So those are the 4 restaurants. However, there is one other place you could go for coffee, tea, sandwiches, and snacks. In the yacht club, there's a little bistro which was open throughout the day. It was a great place to go for a quick bite or to grab something to take back to your room. As I said, you had to make reservations for the specialty restaurants in advance. I was surprised you couldn't make these reservations online prior to embarking. I got in line as soon as I finished registering on Embarkation Day and managed to get some early time slots. If eating before 8 p.m. is important to you, I would advise doing the same. Staff. Since the Star Pride is a smaller ship, there aren't quite as many staff people as you would see on a larger ship, which means some of the service desks might have more limited hours, but I never found it to be a problem. Everyone was very friendly and helpful. The entertainment director was fabulous. He kept all the events moving along and created a light and fun atmosphere. The housekeeping staff worked very hard. I have to say my steward kept my room impeccably clean, and each night there was a special treat, such as chocolates, cookies, or when we were in Curacao, Curacao liquor. When I first entered my room, I was greeted by a Windstar bear. These were nice touches that made you smile each night before you went to bed. Of course, there were many other staff behind the scenes. I felt like they all worked morning, noon, and night to keep everyone happy. Embarkation and disembarkation. Frankly, my embarkation day wasn't great. When I arrived at the cruise terminal, I was given bad directions by 3 different staff people and ended up walking all over the docks before finding my way to the Windstar registration, which was actually in front of the terminal. I ran into other Windstar passengers that were also trying to find their way, so it wasn't just me. I then had to wait in long lines to check my bag, get a shuttle to the ship, board the ship, and register to receive my key card on the ship. Oh, and then I had to get in another line to make dinner reservations. From the time I arrived at the cruise port to the time I finally finished the embarkation and registration process, at least 4 hours had passed. It wasn't the most efficient boarding process and longer than I've experienced on other ships. However, it wouldn't have been as tiring if I hadn't been given bad directions initially. The disembarkation process was much simpler. I was given a specific time to leave the ship. At that time, I was detained about 10 minutes before being allowed to leave the ship. Simple process. Excursions. There were some days when I joined Windstar group excursions, some days when I explored on my own, and some days when I managed to do both. I'll quickly share my experiences with both excursions and free exploration. Tobago. The ship docked in Scarborough on the island of Tobago. This port was a change from the original plan to dock on the other side of the island. Because of this, the snorkeling excursion I had signed up for required a 90-minute bus ride from Scarborough to the village of Speyside. I didn't mind because it allowed me to see much of the island as we drove along the coast and through villages. When we got to Speyside, we were led to 3 glass-bottom boats to take us snorkeling. Across the water were 2 islands, Little Tobago and Goat Island, which created a picturesque setting. I've had better snorkeling experiences, but it was nice to be in the warm water and watch the fish and sea life. We snorkeled for about 30 minutes, returned to shore, boarded the bus, and drove back to Scarborough, where we visited Fort King George. It is a well-preserved colonial fort that honors King George III. It offered beautiful views of Scarborough Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. We then drove back down to the port to reboard the ship, returning at around 2:30 p.m. Bequia. Visiting Bequia was not on the original itinerary. We were supposed to go to the island of Mayro, but evidently the swell was too rocky to get passengers on and off the tender safely. Instead, we headed to Bequia, which is another island in the Grenadines. They offered a couple excursions, but I decided to go on my own. I watched a couple of videos on Bequia and made a plan. When I got to shore, I walked along the Princess Margaret Trail to the Princess Margaret Beach. It was beautiful. The trail ran right along the shore, and there were numerous spots to take in some beautiful vistas. We had limited time, so I retraced my steps and wandered around the small town by the docks. Then I took a tender back to the ship. With limited time, I was happy with my choice to explore on my own. St. Lucia. The ship arrived in St. Lucia, and we had to tender to the port of Soufriere. I joined a motor coach excursion that began at the Botanical Gardens and Diamond Baths, which were once a famous retreat for Napoleon's wife Josephine. The gardens were quite lovely and included a scenic waterfall. After the gardens, we drove to the Terrell waterfall, which I thought was somewhat of a tourist trap. It was very crowded, and people took turns getting their picture taken under the falls. They called it a power shower. We then boarded the bus again and went to a viewpoint where we could get pictures of the Piton Mountains, Gros Piton and Petit Piton. I really enjoyed this perspective of the island. Really stunning views of the mountains, town, and harbor. We then were driven back to the dock. Grenada. I got off the ship at 9 a.m. in the morning with the goal of doing some exploration on my own. I had a snorkeling excursion booked through Windstar in the afternoon, so I only had about 3 hours in the morning to self-explore. Once in the cruise terminal, I spoke to some taxi drivers who suggested I join a group. Each of us would pay $35 for a driver to show us around. There were 7 of us that piled into a fairly large minibus. We first drove through the town of St. George, then up the mountain to a little stand where we were treated to a spice demonstration. It was a quick and informative presentation. We then drove to Fort Frederick, which was an interesting structure with 360-degree views of the mountains and ocean. Next was the Annandale Waterfall, where there was a pretty little setting by the falls. Our final destination was the Grand Anse Beach, which was extremely crowded. I had heard that it was one of the most beautiful beaches in the Caribbean, but I found it far too crowded to appreciate it. We only stayed about a half hour before heading back to the ship. I was happy with my choice to join this impromptu excursion. I was able to see much of the island in a short amount of time for only $35. I ate lunch on the ship and changed into my swim clothes, then headed out for a powerboat excursion to the underwater sculpture park. We motored a short distance and a guide hopped in the water with us, leading us to different areas to view the underwater sculptures. I had an underwater camera, so was able to capture some images. After we had made a loop around the sculpture park, we got back in the boat and cruised to the waters near Grand Anse Beach. We then slowly made our way along the shore back to the ship. It was quite a glorious day and packed with activity, which is how I prefer it. Curacao. Curacao was probably my favorite island on this cruise. The ship docked in Willemstad, and I was off the ship with an excursion at 8:15 a.m. A motor coach took us north from the Willemstad port to Boca Grande on the north shore. It was a dramatic landscape of volcanic rock and crashing waves. Our next stop was Hoffy Mango, which is a mango plantation. We walked past a sugar mill, through mango groves, and then up some stairs to a vantage point where you could see the surrounding hills. It was a beautiful undeveloped area, and I thought it was just magnificent. The bus then took us down the southern coast to Casabo Beach. It is a lovely beach with crystal turquoise waters, and it wasn't too crowded. We only stayed about an hour and then drove back to the ship. We got back at 2 p.m. and I was hot, sweaty, and hungry, but I was determined to see more of Willemstad. So I grabbed some food on the ship and hurried off the boat. A short distance from the ship was the famous Queen Emma Bridge, which opens like a door to let ships through. The bridge was moving as I approached, so I was able to see the bridge in action. When the bridge was closed, I walked to the other side and spent time wandering the streets of Willemstad. Then I crossed back over the bridge and explored the other side of town. Both sides of Willemstad are colorful and charming. As I said, this was my favorite island on the trip. I enjoyed the town because it was artistic and colorful, and I enjoyed the diverse topography outside the city, which included rocky shorelines, beautiful sand beaches, and rolling green hills. Aruba. My plan for this day was to do what I did in Grenada. I planned to get off the ship and negotiate with the driver to show me around. Another solo traveler joined me. Unfortunately, it didn't work quite as well as it did in Grenada. When I got off the ship, the cruise terminal was almost completely empty. Fortunately, we found one taxi driver to show us around. It was much more expensive than Grenada, but since there were two of us, we were able to split the cost. The driver ended up taking us around for about 4 hours, so I think we got our money's worth. Some of the places we visited were the aloe vera factory and farm, which included an interesting demonstration on how they process aloe. The California Lighthouse, which is an iconic landmark in Aruba that sits on the north shore and offers some expansive views. Boca Catalina Beach, Arashi Beach, and the Natural Bridge, which is surrounded by an unusual and dramatic coastline. It is a popular destination for visitors. We also swung by the Bushirabana Gold Mill, which was built right into the rocks near the shore, and the Casabari Rock Formation, which is basically a hill formed of giant boulders with sprawling views from the top. After the driver dropped us back off at the cruise port, I ate a quick lunch and then headed out on my own to explore the port town of Oranjestad. I walked along the marina, spotting some pelicans, and then headed inland to find a small downtown area. It was lovely to see the colorful buildings and views along the coastline. Cartagena. Cartagena was the only port where we stayed overnight, so I basically had 2 days to explore. On the first day, I joined a group tour to Getsemani and the Historic Center. We went to quite a few places on the tour, including 2 parts of the old city's wall, which offer views across the water. We walked through the colorful streets of Getsemani, which has beautifully restored historic buildings. We visited the barracks of Bóvedas, which are now converted to handicraft stores and galleries. Eventually, we ended in Bolivar Park, where we were allowed to wander the streets and shops. Near the park is the Cartagena Cathedral, which is a beautiful building in the center of the old town. Since this was the one night on the cruise where we spent the night in port, I was determined to experience some nightlife in Cartagena. I talked 2 other travelers into joining me. I made a reservation at a restaurant that overlooked Boulevard Park, so we Ubered there around 6 p.m. We ate excellent Colombian food and listened to local musicians while sitting out on a balcony watching the streets come alive below. During dinner, I had been watching these horse-drawn carriages go by, so afterward I negotiated with the driver to take us around the city. He wanted us to pay $90, but I said $50 for all 3 of us, and he agreed. The ride was longer than expected and so fun. He drove us all over the walled city, and we discovered some cool areas we hadn't seen previously. Definitely one of the highlights of the trip. After being dropped off, we went to an area with some musicians and dancers. They were fabulous. It was a great way to finish the evening's entertainment. We took an Uber back to the ship, which by the way was only around $4. On the second day in Cartagena, I didn't sign up for any excursions. After so many group tours, I was anxious to explore on my own. First, I took an Uber to the Convent of Santa Cruz de la Popa. It is a convent, cloister, and chapel located at the top of Mount La Popa. It exceeded my expectations. The building and cloister were really charming and the views were spectacular. Next, I took an Uber to the San Felipe de Barajas Fort. This is an iconic landmark that is popular with tourists. Colombians can enter for free, but tourists have to pay around $7 to enter. The fort is quite impressive. As you zigzag up to the top, you can see the intricate stonework required to build such a fortress. When you get to the top, there are several terraces and passageways. It also has panoramic views of the surrounding area. It was very hot out that day, so I didn't stay long, but I was glad I made the effort to see this important history. I hailed another inexpensive Uber and went back to the historic old town. I covered just about every street in the old town, retracing some of my steps from the day before, but discovering new streets and shops as well. I really enjoyed my day, which was at my own pace, and I felt very safe as a solo traveler wandering the streets. Isla Aroma, San Blas Islands. Windstar has a tradition where they set up a beach day on an island. This was that day. They tendered everyone over to the shore. Isla Aroma is a very, very small island. You can walk around it in 15 minutes. The beach was wonderful, and the waters were very blue and clear. Windstar provides kayaks and paddleboards for everyone's use. A friend and I got in a 2-seater kayak and paddled halfway around the island and then back. Just loved it. They had a big barbecue with food and desserts, coconut drinks, and rum punch. There were also some local dancers to entertain and a mola display if you wanted to take home a local souvenir. I had brought my snorkel gear, and the snorkeling was much better than I expected. Lots of sporadic, pretty fish and interesting coral. I was one of the last to leave the island since it was such a beautiful day. Isla Colón, Bocas del Toro. On this day, we had an early start at 8 a.m. We tendered to a dock on one side of Isla Colón. I had signed up for an excursion to Bird Island and Starfish Beach. A few days before the excursion, we were told they were changing the excursion because of water swells and would not be going to Bird Island. Instead, we would be going to a different channel known for birding. It was a beautiful powerboat ride to the channel, although we really didn't see many birds. We heard plenty of them, and our guide, who could differentiate the bird sounds, told us colorful information about the birds we were hearing. It was a nice diversion. We then motored to Starfish Beach. I immediately hopped in the water with my snorkel gear to observe these fabulous creatures lining the shallow waters. Afterward, I took a walk along the gorgeous beach. We stayed for a short while and then powered back to our starting point. The excursion took about 4 hours. We weren't given time for any additional exploration of the island, but were promptly tendered back to the ship. Panama Canal Transit. I woke at 2 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep because I wanted to make sure I got up early to experience the crossing. I was in the yacht club by 4 a.m., which was stupid because it was dark out. But by 6 a.m., I witnessed the most amazing sunrise while beginning our trip through the canal. It was stunning and the most beautiful part of the transit. I stayed out on the decks for most of the day, watching the ship go through each lock, cruising through the vast Gatun Lake, and passing under some spectacular bridges. See my video on the Panama Canal Transit to get a full version of the experience. After we made it out to the Gulf of Panama, they had a captain's farewell on the top deck. So that's it. Overall, I enjoyed my experience on the Star Pride, especially because I met other wonderful solo travelers who enhanced my days. I've always said that one of the joys of traveling solo is meeting new people, and I was certainly blessed on this trip. The Star Pride is a more intimate ship. I'm not sure the exact number of passengers on this cruise, but it was somewhere between 100 and 150. You can see by this picture how the Star Pride compares to some of the bigger ships. I prefer this type of cruise ship where everything seems much more personal. A couple quick notes. Unlike other cruises I've been on, the excursions would often extend past the lunch hour with no food offered. I found myself often eating lunch at 3 p.m. and the only restaurant available was the outdoor Star Grill, which had limited options. So if you take a Windstar cruise, you might want to pack a few snacks with you or grab something extra from the morning buffet. The good news is they give you a water bottle, which is consistently refilled in your stateroom. You can bring it with you on the excursions. They also distribute snorkeling gear for anyone on the ship interested in snorkeling. It was nice to have your own personal gear throughout the cruise. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask in the comments section and check out the Senior Solo Travel website, the Travel Facebook forum, and other videos from this trip. I have left links to all these sites in the description below. And if you'd like to follow my senior and solo travel journeys, please like and subscribe. Cheers!